Hey guys, welcome back to the second tutorial that we're doing on menus. So this time we're going to be drawing our menu to the screen. And actually I might be moving through this pretty fast because I don't really want to concentrate on the drawing elements themselves. This isn't really a series on how to design, how to draw menus. It's more about accessing all of our data from the grids. So we're probably going to pick up the pace a little bit here. Let's go into the Draw GUI event and draw our menus. And let's just lay out the elements that we need to draw. So I'm going to split this up into 4 parts. So first we're going to draw the back of the menu. I'm just going to draw a black rectangle, but if you have a nice UI, you will want to draw that here. Then we're going to draw the elements on the left side. So remember, those are the elements that we were storing as strings in the first columns of all of our grids. Then I'm just going to draw a dividing line. And then I'm going to draw any of the visual elements themselves. So for example, with the audio sliders, we're just going to draw some lines and knobs. So those will be the elements on the right side. All right, now, firstly, let's do the setup. I'm actually just going to add a line right here that's going to stop us from drawing if we're not currently paused. And if you remember, in the create event, we had set up a variable called global.pause, and we'd set this to true, and we're going to toggle this whenever we want the pause menu to come up. Which means we don't want any of this drawing if it is false. So let's put if, so not global.pause. So this is saying if global.pause is false, then exit, and then it's not going to run any of this. Now, a lot of my menu is going to be relative to the size of the view currently, and I was storing what size the view was in a couple other global variables, these two right here. And I'm probably going to be referencing these a lot throughout this draw event, so I'm actually just going to make some local variables that shortens these words. So let's do, G width for the global view width and G height for the global view height. All right, now the pause menu. So this one's going to be easy. So we're going to draw rectangle color. So the first 2 coordinates I'm going to give it is the top left corner of the screen, which is 0, 0, and then whatever the view width and height is. Now for the color, I'm actually just going to make another variable and make that equal to black so that I don't have to keep writing out C black. And then the last argument is if it's an outline or a filled in rectangle, so we put false because we want it filled in. All right, so that will draw a black rectangle. Now we draw the elements on the left side. So if you remember in the preview, my elements on the left side, they're centered in the screen and then they're offset slightly to the left, and they're actually right justified text. Right, so I'm going to change a couple of the alignments here. We're going to draw set V-align to be the middle, so that's the vertical alignment, and then draw set H-align to the right. So we will get it anchored in the middle and on the right. All right, next I need a few more variables, and I'm actually going to put them up here because they're going to be used for all of our drawing events. So the first one is the grid itself. So remember, we only want to be drawing one page at a time, so we only need access to one of these pages that we've set up because we're going to want to be drawing those elements for that page. And we had set up a menu pages array that is storing all of the IDs for the grids. So we need to pull out whatever page we're on, that entry in the array. So let's do that. I'm going to make a variable called dsgrid equal to the menu pages page entry. And I'm also just going to get the height of the grid because that will get us the number of elements in the grid. So if it's the main menu, there are 3 entries, but if it's the settings, there are 5. And that's because we're going to want to draw them centralized, and depending on how many elements there are, we're going to have to bump them up or down to get where we should start drawing the elements from. All right, so a few more variables first. A Y buffer and X buffer, and these are going to be how far away our elements are from each other or from the dividing line. So the Y buffer is how far they are vertically from each other, and the X buffer is how far they are from the dividing line. So you can play with those variables if you want. Next is a start Y, and this is where I'm going to start drawing the elements from. Because the first element isn't going to be drawing right in the center, it's going to be drawing in the center and then up a little bit. And that little bit specifically is going to be half the amount of space that all of the entries are taking up. So let's get that point. So that's going to be, so half of the view width is going to get us to the center of the screen, and now we have to move up a little bit. So we know the number of elements is equal to the ds height, and we actually have to put -1 here because I want the very first entry to not be affected by the Y buffer. I know that sounds very strange in the abstract, but in the end you'll see that all this math is going to work out. So we halve that, and then we multiply this by the Y buffer because Each entry is going to take up kind of one y buffer. All right, so that is the start y, and let's also get the start x. And I'm just going to put this as half of the total width. All right, good. So that is our setup. These are variables that are going to be used by all of these sections. Now for the specific ones in here, so for the left side, so my first element, so for example for the main menu, that would be the resume, that is going to start drawing itself at this start y location that we've worked out. And then the next one is going to add a y buffer to that and draw it at the next slot. And for the start x, this is just the middle of the screen, so we're going to actually have to bump this over for the left side. So another variable, and I'm going to call this LTX, for left text x position, as just the start x minus the x buffer. All right, and now we're going to have to loop through the elements that we've got from this grid. So we want to pull out this one, then this one, and then this one, and we're going to draw these strings to the screen. So we're going to have to use another repeat loop, and we're going to need a variable that we are incrementing to loop through the y positions of the grid. So we use yy again, and the number of times we're repeating is the number of elements in the grid, which we have gotten here. So we use ds height, and remember to increment that yy variable. All right. So like I said, while this start y value is okay for the first string that we're drawing, every subsequent one is going to have to be adding the y buffer to its position. So I'm going to set up another variable, and I might just add it here. So we haven't actually set a value, we've just declared it, and then we'll set it in here. So this will be equal to the start y and then times whatever yy is by the y buffer. So it starts off at 0, so this is going to be 0 for the first one, so it's just going to start at start y. And then for the next one, which is going to equal y, we get plus 1 y buffer. And it's going to keep looping through like that. So we've got our y position, now let's draw the actual text. So we start off at the LTX, LTY, and now we actually have to pull the value out of the grid. So we're accessing the grid, and the coordinates that we give it, right? So it was the first row, so our XX is going to be 0, and then YY is going to be whatever row we're on. Alright, so that is it for the strings. Now let's just draw the dividing line. So this one should be pretty easy. I'm just going to use the function drawLine. So it's going to start right in the middle at start x, same position that the elements are drawing from, and then it'll go down to where the elements finish, which is just going to be LTY. Right, so this thing that is going to keep incrementing through the loop, we can use that to get the final position of the elements. Alright, so let's run and see what that looks like so far. Okay, there we go. So we have the elements drawing themselves. And you might want to add a y buffer to the ends of this to get the line drawing to either side, but that's just aesthetics. Alright, and before we go any further, I'm actually going to add a way for us to move through the inventory. So if you remember, we started setting this up with our menu options. So right now we set that to be at the very top. And then whenever we alter this value, we should change the thing that we're currently selecting. So right now it should just be on the first one. So let's get it to draw the thing differently if we are selecting it. So let's add a highlight to it. So all we have to do is in here, instead of draw text just like this, let's draw text color. And I'm going to reuse this C value from before. By default, this is going to be white, but if we find that our current YY value is equal to whatever row that we're on. So if it finds that the row that we're currently selecting is the one that we are currently drawing in our repeat loop, then let's change this C to be a different color. And if you want, we can even just alter its X value a little bit. So I might add another variable called X offset. Again, by default, this is going to be 0, but here I'm going to minus half of the X buffer. So I'm just going to move the one that we're selecting over a little bit. So all we have to do now is add XO to the horizontal position. So generally, this is just going to be 0, so it's going to be adding 0, but if we're selecting it, it's going to move it over a little bit. And we have to fill in those additional arguments for the color. And we also need an alpha value, let's just put 1. Okay, let's run the game and see that. Okay, good. So this is coming up as orange and it's been shifted over. Now we should add a way to change our selection. So let's come into the step event and add some inputs. And just like the draw event, I'm actually just going to grab this exact same line because we don't want to be doing any of this if we're not actually paused. So let's add that. And now I'm just going to copy in some inputs. You've probably seen these before. I don't really want to spend too much time on this. I'm basically just getting the key presses of whatever key I have set in these variables. So remember, we were declaring those up here. So at the moment, I've just got this set to the keyboard presses. So I've just gotten the up, down, and enter because that's all we're going to be using for today. All right, and I'm also just going to grab this because we are also going to be needing access to the grid in the step event. All right, and now let's detect whether we have gotten any change in the inputs. So I'm going to make a variable called oChange for option change. So this is if we're changing the option that we're on. And I'm just going to make this a sum so that if we happen to be pressing these down at the exact same time, they're going to cancel out. So now I know that if oChange is not equal to 0, then we've either pressed down or we've pressed up. So let's go like that. Then we know that now it is time to change what menu option that we're on. So we can go menu option. For the specific page that we're on, remember that we had menu options for all of the different pages. And all we have to do is just add whatever this sum equates to. So this is either going to be 1 or -1. Plus equals option change. All right, but we're probably going to want to clamp this to be between only however many options that we have. And again, the number of elements that we have is just the DS height. So if I am on the third option and then I press down again, I don't want this to keep going down. I want it to loop back to the start. So if the menu option of whatever page we're on is larger than the total height of the elements, which is just the number of elements, and then we have to put -1 because remember 0 is going to be counted as an entry. That's the first entry. So if that is the case, then we know we have reached the very bottom entry, and let's loop back to the very top, which is going to be entry 0. All right, and similarly, if we are up the very top and then we hit up again and we go into a negative, then we're going to want to loop back to the bottom. All right, so if we run that, there we go, so we can change the option. All right, cool. Now let's add a way for us to change what page that we're on. So what this is going to do is we're going to start setting up our ability to execute whatever kind of element it is. So how I'm going to do it is when I'm on an element and I hit enter, I'm going to go and do whatever that element is for. So if I hit enter on resume, I'm going to resume the game. And if I hit enter on a page transfer element, so if I hit enter on settings, then I'm going to go to the settings page. And for today's tutorial, we're only going to set up that page transfer one, but as you'll see, it's just going to be adding cases to a switch statement. So let's get whether we have pressed enter. So if input enter P, then what we're going to do is use a switch statement. And what we're switching is actually the contents of what type of element that we are on. So let's just write this out. DS grid. So we're getting the types. Those are in column 1, the second column. So we put 1. And then the row that we're on is actually going to be whatever menu option is currently equal to. So whatever option we're currently selecting is going to be the element that we want to access. So we put like that. And now watch your brackets here because we're actually inside 2 square brackets. All right. So now what we're saying is whatever this is equal to, now this is going to get one of those element types. So one of these. So depending on what this is, we're going to do different things. And now let's just do the page transfer one. So in the case that it is equal to menu element type dot page transfer, then we do what a page transfer does. So we are changing the page, and now we put the page that we want it to direct us to. So where were we storing that again? Right here in the second column of whatever grid it is. So we get from column 2, menu of whatever option we're selecting. And don't forget the break. All right, and in future tutorials, we literally just add all of the different cases for all the different elements, but we'll just stay with this one for now. And what you could also do is add some kind of audio if you want. If you want it to play a sound when you transition throughout the menu, you'd put it here. All right, but that should do us, so let's run the game. So if we hit enter on resume or exit, it shouldn't do anything because it's not the type page transfer, but if we do it on settings, it should take us to another page. And same for any of these. All right, good. Now finally, let's draw those elements on the right side if we're on a page that actually has them. So if we're on a page, for example, like the audio that has those volume sliders. So let's come over to the Draw GUI. This will be the last thing we do today. Down to here. Now remember, we are still shifting the alignment over from the left side. So because we're now drawing on the right side, I'm going to align everything back to the left. So let's change this. And let's also add back, just so that we don't forget, because you'll want to change this back once we're done with everything. So down here, just make sure that you're changing the vertical alignment back. The default value is just the top. Okay, and just like we did for the left, I'm going to have an RTX, so the right position that we're going to start drawing it from, which is going to be basically the same as this. And let's also set up the Y position, because we're also going to have a loop where we are adding the Y buffer. Alright, except now instead of just drawing text, we're going to be drawing different things, again, depending on what type of element it is. So, similar to our step event, we can actually just grab this. But instead of the Y coordinate being the option that we're on, because we're just looping through the entire grid, this is just going to be whatever YY is equal to. So let's also remember to increment our YY value here. Okay. So what we also need to do, just like before, is set the Y position for what we're currently drawing, and that is going to be RTY times the Y buffer. Alright, so now when we're going through the switch statement, we're going to be checking to see if any of the element types that we're on is a shift or a slider or a toggle or an input, and if it finds any of those, then we will draw them. So let's start with the shift type. So for this one, we are going to want to pull out one of these values, right? So this is the current value of what we're on, and this is the entry in the array here that we want to access and draw. So if it's currently set to 0, then we want to pull out harmless and we want to draw that. So we need access to both these columns, and that is going to be column 3 and 4. So let's grab those. Just like that. And then I'm just going to make a color here. Let's just make it white. And then let's draw the text. So RTX, RTY, and now we have to get, so this value, the entry in this array. So current array, like that. All right, so that's just going to draw the string, but I'm also actually going to draw a left shift and a right shift either side. And we can just add strings together like this. So now it will draw this whole string. So it's going to draw this thing, and then one of these entries, and then this string. But I only want to draw them as a visual indicator to the player if they can actually shift to the left or right. So if I'm on entry number 0, then actually I can't shift anymore to the left, so I don't want to draw it then. And if I'm at the very end of this array, then I can't shift anymore to the right. So let's check, before we go and draw it, if our current value is equal to 0, I'm just going to make left shift now an empty string. So then when it goes and adds it here, it's not going to make any visual difference. And same for the other side. Just like that. All right, so let's run that and test that one. Whoops, looks like I put a minus where it should have been a plus. Yep, right here, this should be a plus. All right. There we go. And you can see that our left shifts are working because we are not drawing that leftmost shift because we are on entry number 0. All right, and we'll get to actually altering these values in another tutorial, but for now, let's keep going and draw. Next up is the sliders. All right, so remember these have a couple of elements to them. We have a line, a circle, and also a percent, or at least I'm going to draw it as a percent. So let's just do our setup as usual. So I'm going to have a variable called len, and this is going to be the length of the line that we draw. I'm just going to set this to 64. We will grab the current value of what the slider is on, and remember, you can see right here it is in column 0, 1, 2, 3. I'm also just going to set the color to white. So first up, let's draw the line. So I'm going to use draw line width. Again, we use RTX, RTY, and then the second x coordinate is RTX plus whatever you set as the length. Don't change the y, have it at a width of 2. All right, next the circle. Now, its position is going to depend on whatever current value is. So we kind of want it as a ratio between whatever values that you set in here. Or again, this is just how I'm displaying it. So you might want to alter this a little bit. So I'm going to set up another variable called circle position. We are also going to need access to the array. And now this is going to be a bit of ugly maths here, but just bear with me. So we're getting the current value, right? So this is either going to be 0 or 1. And then we take this away from whatever the first value in your little array is here. And this is just, I've done this in case you have different numbers here. So if you have a number that's like 2 or 5 and you're going between values of 2 and 5, and then we divide this by the bottom so that we get kind of a ratio of where this is between the two entries here. So now we just put RTX plus, and we're going to do circle pos times the length. Because this is going to be a decimal number, if we times that by the length, so for example, if this works out to be 0.5, if the volume is in the middle, then if we times that by the length, then that's going to get us right to the center of the line, which is where we want the slider to appear. So we might even test this. Let's change this to some different variables. We'll go 0.5, 0.2, and I'll keep that one as 1. And finally, the actual text itself. And I'm just going to do this at length times 1.2, just so that it's a little bit over to the right of whatever the length is. And now I'm actually going to use this value here, because I know this is going to be some decimal number, right? So if we use this, and then times it by 100, we can get the percent. And what I'm going to do is firstly, because this is a number, I'm going to convert this to a string because we have to be drawing a string here. And I'm also going to floor it. And then I'm going to add a percent sign so that it looks like we're drawing a percent. All right, let's run that. There we go. So that's worked perfectly. All right, let's keep going. Next case is the toggle. So 2 things to draw here, on and off. And I'm basically just going to draw it so that whatever value that it currently is, so if the toggle is on 0, so if it's currently on, then I'm going to draw the on string completely filled in. And if it is on the other side, then I'm going to draw it kind of gray. So let me just set up the strings. But now for their colors, so I'm actually going to have 2 colors. And depending on what the current value is, right, which is stored in the 3rd column, as you can see here for our toggle type here. So it's also stored in that column. So you might want to draw actually these values, but this is just a suggestion for what you can do. So if current value is equal to 0, then I'm going to set color 1, which is going to be the color for this one, to be C, which I'm just going to set as white. And in this case, C2 we know is going to be that darker gray. Otherwise, it's just going to be the other way around. All right, so now we can color them. Just like that. This one, let's move it over. I'll just do 32. There we go. So we can see that it is currently off, just like I set it here. All right, next one. And this is the last one, the input. Now, just like before, we're going to get the current value of the input, which are stored in the 4th column, which is column 0, 1, 2, 3. So let's get it. And now, depending on what the value is, we're going to want to draw different things. Now, I'm just going to keep this simple and do this as a switch statement, because while this is fairly easy for characters, we're going to have to manually set up the strings for virtual keyboard, because the actual value of this is just a bunch of numbers, but we have to translate this into something that's going to be meaningful to the player. So we're going to check if whatever this thing is, which is just going to be a bunch of numbers. So if this is equal to whatever the bunch of numbers that vk up is, I'm going to change a variable that I'm just going to call string val. So let's just declare that here. So I'm going to make this equal to up key. Right, and let's do this for a bunch of them. And then finally, it's a little easier if it's just any of the letter keys. What we can do is say if it's not any of these, we can just go set the default case as, so we can use this function chr to get the character that this is. All right, and now we just draw whatever string val is. So again, we set our color to white, draw the text, like that. All right, let's run the game. So everything that we're drawing in the menu should be set up now. All right, good. So we're done. Now in the next tutorial, we'll get to actually changing and inputting things into our menu. So I'd just like to thank everyone on Patreon who is supporting me to create these tutorials. And I'd like to give a special shout out to Danielle Hargrave, Max Molinaro, Uthelian, XD Game Studio, The Great Poultry, Stuart Wells, Monju72, and Hunter T. Thanks for watching guys, I hope you're well, and I'll see you next time.